Over the past 14 weeks, whilst training for my first ever marathon, I've managed to increase my VO2 max by almost 10%. So if you're wondering how I could possibly have done that, how I've been tracking it and how accurate that could be, or maybe what even is VO2 max, then watch on. I've got tons of health and fitness data at my fingertips, or rather on my wrist, on my Garmin watch, things like pace, distance, time, and also my 2-digit VO2 max number. Now you might be wondering how accurate that is. We've done an entire video testing exactly that, where I put my body on the line to find that out. So rest assured, we're pretty confident it's pretty accurate. And then VO2 max as a whole is essentially a measure of your current fitness. The higher the number, the higher your aerobic fitness, and ultimately the better for your running performance. We'll come on to me in a second, but more specifically, VO2 max is a measure of the maximum amount of oxygen in milliliters per kilogram of body weight per minute that you can successfully deliver to your muscles. So if you're going to be taking on running or any form of aerobic exercise, a higher VO2 max means that you can deliver more oxygen more efficiently via your red blood cells to your muscles to help you deal with that physical exertion. The more oxygen your body can use during exercise, then the easier that exercise will feel. So a higher VO2 max will make exercise feel easier. So how have I increased my VO2 max by so much? Well, actually, it's been a byproduct of structured training. I didn't set out to improve my VO2 max at all. I was trying to train for my first ever marathon, and still am, in Valencia later this year, which means for the past 3 or more months, I've had to have a really structured training regime and have the right balance of different types of running in there, which has also increased my VO2 max, which has been really exciting because it's motivated me to see that improvement month on month, or even week by week sometimes. And in fact, if I go back to July before I started this training block, my VO2 max was 60. And now in October, at the time of recording this, it's 64, which is an increase of around 7%, which is amazing. So obviously I've felt pretty tired because I'm running way further than I've ever run before in my life. Even as a professional athlete, my longest run on a Sunday might have been only 12 or 13 miles at the most. So all of a sudden to be running 30k, that's a lot further than I've ever had to run before. So there's the combination of distance and just aerobic endurance that I'm achieving through that, but also the structure of my week. I've had to fit 3 runs into my week around work and around weight training. I'm doing 2 sessions in the gym as well every week. And that structure has meant that I've been consistent, because I was so scared of not completing the distance when I get to that marathon ultimately, that I've had to force myself to be really regimented. And consistency, I think, is the key to any training plan, and I've been rewarded by it. It hasn't all of a sudden leapt from 60 to 64 in terms of my VO2 max. There have been incremental gains week on week over the last 3 to 6 months. For additional context, during my professional career, where I was probably running 12 times a week, so a massive difference to what I'm able to do now, my VO2 max peaked as high as around 80. After retiring and then having a few aimless years, my VO2 max had dipped under 60. So to see it go up to 60 and then now to 64 with the consistent training is something that kind of takes me back to those professional athlete days when you get to see improvements week on week. And arguably, as a less well-trained runner now, I'm getting to see bigger improvements over shorter periods of time. So I'm training for the marathon, and mine's in Valencia, but I'd love to know what you might be training for, whether that's a certain distance or a very specific event. So drop us a comment and I would love to give you a little bit of love by replying. So I hadn't set out to improve my VO2 max, and actually VO2 max is just a number, so I wouldn't get hung up on it. But what it can be is what it's been to me, which is a huge motivator, because it shows that I've had the right balance of types of training and training intensities in what I've been doing. And it's been a good kind of vindicator for my training plan and for the hard work that I've been putting in. For the most accurate possible VO2 max reading, then ideally you'd head into a lab, you'd run on a treadmill, you'd wear a really uncomfortable mask on your face. The treadmill's incline would increase every set period of time until you literally can't run anymore. And then that measures your VO2 max. It's a really painful process, one I had to do a lot throughout my career before there was better technology that allowed you to do it on your wrist. But now having it on your wrist is a really convenient way of keeping track of it without spending out the money on lab tests or also having to put yourself through that pain. And Sarah and I both put ourselves through that. They put our bodies on the line in a real lab test to see how accurate the watches were, and kind of reassured ourselves ultimately that you're getting a very good estimate by using the VO2 max on your wrist. But what allows them to be so reliable? Well, your Garmin watch uses a smart analytics engine to combine data like the pace at which you're running with the heart rate required for you to run at that pace to give you a gauge of how hard that is on your body, to ultimately give you an accurate estimate of your VO2 max figure. It's worth noting that generally speaking, men will have higher VO2 max figures than women, and also that your VO2 max is likely to decline as you get older, although I'm doing my best to kind of counteract that as we speak. Also, running in very humid or hot conditions and potentially at high altitude can have an effect on your VO2 max figure. But some Garmin devices can actually take those factors like altitude and heat acclimation into account when they're calculating your score. So my Garmin can actually detect my lactate threshold, which whilst it's not the same thing as VO2 max, it is very closely related because ultimately it's a measure of that accumulating fatigue. It's the point at which things get really tough because your body can no longer clear out the lactate that it's accumulating through that oxygen debt. You're not getting enough oxygen in to clear it out. So you start to fatigue. It's the transition from aerobic to anaerobic work. And I've been seeing over different workouts that I've done over the subsequent weeks of my training that my watch will tell me what my heart rate is and my pace is for my lactate threshold. And I've seen that the heart rate will stay the same or maybe get slightly lower and the pace has got faster. So it shows that I'm shifting my lactate threshold. Ultimately, if you imagine the lactate levels accumulating in your blood as a graph, you've got the axis along the bottom, which is your pace at which you're running, and then this is how much lactate is in your blood. So as you run faster and faster and faster, the lactate stays relatively flat until you hit this turn point, this threshold, at which point you just can't clear it out anymore and it starts to really increase, and that makes it much harder to run. You feel really heavy-legged. And when you're getting fitter, what you're doing is shifting that graph to the right, which means that you're achieving that threshold at a faster running pace. So your heart rate will be the same, you'll be running slightly faster, and that's the point at which you hit your lactate threshold. So back in the day, I had the luxury of a physiologist who would come out in the field with me whilst I was doing my threshold runs in the park and physically take a blood sample and then be measuring my heart rate and how fast I was running from my watch. And then they would plot that on a graph, and I had 10 years worth of that data. But now I get it automatically detected on my wrist. And in fact, it says right now that detected a couple of weeks ago now was a new lactate threshold of 349 per kilometer in terms of the pace that I was running at, and a heart rate of 168 BPM. So what workouts have I done in my marathon training build-up, and which do I think have had the biggest impact on my VO2 max score? Well, first off, let's talk about the structure of my week. 2 gym sessions, and one of those I've tried to keep as essentially a high intensity training gym session, whereas the other one's more focused on controlled, slow movements. And then on top of that, I've got 3 runs, one as a recovery run, sometimes with some strides afterwards. The second one is my harder run, so the faster run that is, whether that's intervals, a fartlek, tempo or threshold, it's one of those. And then one is my long run, which I've been building up in order to get the time on my feet, in order to give me the confidence to complete the marathon distance. It's also worth saying that marathon specific workouts aren't actually the most efficient to give you that maximum VO2 max benefit. Things like high intensity training, HIIT training that I mentioned in the gym, they definitely will help. But then also intervals where you're running at a VO2 max intensity, so that's faster than marathon pace arguably. You're talking about 5k or 10k pace for a sustained period, 2 or 3 minutes at least, and then taking relatively short recoveries. Those are the ones that give you the most bang for your buck in terms of your VO2 max. So let's take a look at what I've been doing, and I think we'll be able to pull out the sessions where they've given me the most benefit. There's been loads of variety in my faster run of the week as I've been doing things like tempo runs, threshold runs, so I won't focus on those too much here, but the types of interval sessions that I've been doing, whether they're marathon specific or not, have been things like a 5k flat out, maybe that's at a park run to gauge my fitness, 4 times 5 minutes at 10k or half marathon effort in the middle of a longer run, 8 times 1k, which I'd say is right at the heart of running a faster 5 or 10k. So this is something to get the pace in your legs and will really help with your VO2 max increasing. 8 by 1k, 90 seconds recovery, and I was actually alternating 5k and 10k pace in alternate reps. 6 by a mile, it's a very similar session to 8 by a k, and 10 by 800, I've done all of those sessions. 90 seconds recovery for 10 times 800, 3-minute recovery for 6 times a mile, and we're talking about, again, 5k, 10k pace for the mile reps, and just getting that consistent time on your feet, operating at that VO2 max intensity. Then at the other end of the spectrum, things like 60-second intervals, I actually did 24 times 60 seconds with 30 seconds recovery. But you can do anything from 10 times 60 seconds up to what I did and look at 30, 60, maybe even 90 seconds recovery if you're focusing on that intensity. And again, that helps you to run at a pace above, which is a good thing for improving your VO2 max. And then finally, I guess, I was throwing in things like 3 times 5k as a very core marathon training session, but one that I wouldn't say would have had the biggest impact on my VO2 max compared to some of those shorter intervals. I've been following my own training plan, but what's been interesting is that I still get the suggested workouts on my Garmin every day, and they've been quite closely aligned often with the sort of thing that I've been doing. And if you were to use the suggested workouts to improve your VO2 max, what I suggest is to set a goal, perhaps through the race widget, of running a faster 5 or 10k, put that into your watch, and then the suggested workouts that you get are likely to be tailored towards giving you an improved VO2 max, kind of by definition, because that's what will help you run a faster 5 or 10k. So are you training for a specific event like me, and how much do you keep an eye on your VO2 max score? How have you had any difficulty in getting it to increase, or have you got any questions about it? We've had loads of questions in the past from people who struggle with this, so we'd love to hear from you. Maybe drop us a comment, or if you don't already watch or listen to it, please check out our podcast on all podcast platforms as well as on YouTube, or email in to podcast@therunningchannel.com because we get to answer your questions in loads more detail than we possibly can by typing. And if you'd like a deeper dive into how my marathon training's been going to see me taking it on, then make sure you check out this video